Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining PCM for our second webinar, Insights Learning Music in a Crisis. My name is Melissa Freilich, and I'm the Director of Development here at the Pasadena Conservatory. As we are well into our fourth month of navigating the challenges around COVID-19, we continue to see our musical community adapt and connect with one another, working hard to explore new ways to study, perform, and enjoy music in a completely new environment. During today's webinar, you will hear from some PCM parents about how their families have adapted to learning and performing music online. Facilitating the discussion is Elisa Callow, who happens to be the parent of a PCM alum. Elisa is the founding director of the Armory Center for the Arts and has extensive experience working with nonprofits, exploring and facilitating connections between arts and community. Recently retired, Elisa is a student in some of our classes for adults and recently authored The Urban Forager, a wonderful cookbook that explores cooking on LA's East Side. She brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to this discussion, and we are really grateful for her time today. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Today's program will be an hour long, and we've reserved about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. We've disabled the chat function, so if you have any questions for Elisa or our parents, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will relay the questions in the order they were received, and our panelists will answer as many questions as time permits. One final note is that we are recording today's session, so if you have to log off early, you can view the video later. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to Elisa.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm assuming I'm seeing many people, and we're going to pretend that we're in a non-virtual space for the moment. I am really excited about this conversation. Just to let you know, we had a pre-conversation and I recorded it for my own, just getting myself queued up, and it was really interesting. So I'm assuming the same thing will happen today. And what I'd like to do first is just start by having everyone introduce themselves, mainly because I'd like them to give us their name, and I'll let you know who's first, so you don't have to worry. Their name, the age of your kids, and what they are participating in the Pasadena Conservatory Music. Now, this can go on for quite some time because these are some of the most active parents I've experienced. But I know they know how to be brief, and then we're going to queue up some questions for them that I think you'll find interesting. And then as you're listening, as Melissa said, think about the kinds of questions that you still have. So I'd like Nancy to start. I think she's got the oldest bunch in the group of boys.
Yes, I think I do. I'm Nancy Elliott. I am a homeschooling mom of 3 teenage boys. I actually have a graduate, a 2020 high school graduate that I'm super proud of. Jaden's has studied guitar with Brian Barony, and he's also participated in the Los Angeles Youth Orchestra with Felix Bullock. My middle son, Jude, has studied clarinet with both Heather Millette and Chris Stottenborough. And my youngest is a cellist. He's 14 and he studies with Andrew Cook.
Wow. All right. And then we're going to skip the middle school / high school student and go straight to our youngest members. So Susie and Eric are here as well. You'll know that it's them because there's 2. Could you tell us about your kids and what they're involved in?
Sure. We've got 2 boys, a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, so much on the other spectrum of Nancy. We actually started with PCM in the Young Musicians program. Both my boys did. My oldest one went into the Piano Bridge program where we met Dr. Stephen Cook, and they have been taking lessons with him in piano for, I'd say, at least the past 3 years. And then, yeah, and I myself am a student as well at PCM, taking classes in the adult ukulele class. And Eric's also one of the board members. So, yeah.
This is a very well-rounded group. And then last but certainly not least is Kiku Iwata. And I believe
Hi, I'm Kiku Iwata, and my daughter Kaylani She's been at PCM as well, she started back in Young Musicians too when she was 6 years old, and she does. Her violin teacher is Elizabeth Hedman. She also does doing violin jazz with Megan, teacher Megan, and jazz piano with teacher Amy Rowe, and then she's doing theory with teacher Katie Eames, and she's doing intermediate violin ensemble with Amy Creston, and she was also doing chamber uh, program, and she was doing mariachi when the whole coronavirus thing started happening, and then the group classes, the mariachi and the chamber had to stop.
Okay, no, you know, any parents out there that are feeling insecure, it's fine. You'll be fine. To help you out here. So what I was noticing is it was a great selection of parents for many reasons. First, that they're so involved, but also we have 3 different age groups of kids. We have several kinds of classes that are represented and forms of classes, be it ensemble or one-on-one, et cetera. So that really enriches this conversation. And all of them, when we spoke earlier, talked about their various ways that their teachers, their faculty members, really were amazingly flexible in their responses to the challenge of teaching online. And so we've got this really rich kind of set of you know, a researcher would love this, perfect pool. So, and you know, these inventive kind of workarounds, as you all called it, will be a big part of the discussion. But the first question I'd like, and I'd like to pose it to Nancy, is, and all of you will be asked as well. So let's go in the order of that we started, Nancy, then Susie and Eric, and then Kiku. The first is just, what did you notice? 2 or 3 things that you found really kind of interesting about this period that you want to speak about. This is the post-COVID period, in case you were forgetting.
Yes. Yeah. You know, as I've been thinking about it since our last conversation, I think the main takeaway that I've had is this idea of ownership. Our homeschool philosophy really bases itself on the idea that true education is self-education. And as I've reflected on the transition to virtual lessons, what I realized is that it actually really put the onus on my sons to take a different level of ownership for their musicianship. Their teachers are critical, facilitators, coaches, mentors, and the transfer of knowledge is extremely important, but that transfer includes receiving and taking ownership. And so I feel like what has happened with my boys is that they have had an increased level of ownership in their own musicianship, and they are actually dedicated musicians and have been for many years. But I feel like the switching to the virtual lesson actually left them even more responsible of their own musicality. And so I've seen something blossom in them through this season.
Oh. And I'm sure that's true of your young boys, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you spoke about that, and you know, feel free.
So what Nancy was describing is basically our end goal. We are nowhere near that. And in fact, so yeah, I was thinking about a lot about our previous discussion about this, and one of the things with the piano that my boys play is that it's a very solitary instrument. So, you know, whereas I know Kiku's kids are her daughter is like an ensemble and part of like the whole, like a whole group and everything. Our kids are playing a very solitary instrument. So our whole approach to this pre-COVID was for our kids to treat every single lesson as though they were giving a concert to Dr. Cook. And then COVID hit. So then they started performing to a computer screen, which we all know is not the same. But so in the beginning, of course, for us, there were challenges of, you know, attention and trying to get the kids to just sit through a lesson while looking at the computer screen. And we're very blessed because Dr. Cook has been so supportive and just working with the boys and just constantly motivating them. And what we found is that we ended up becoming more involved in the very beginning, because whereas in a regular lesson, Dr. Cook would be the one who's marking up the music and telling them what fingers to use, we now had to take that ownership. So that was one thing that we, really got involved with. Then when it came to the practice, we, in the beginning, I'd say we had some issues getting the boys to practice, but it was through the open communication with Dr. Cook that we said, hey, help us out. What can we do? Give us some ideas on terms of like how to motivate them. And he did just that. So we've actually kind of started flipping it around, maybe about a couple weeks or a month into it. But then what we started noticing was the boys are home a lot, so they have nothing to do other than practice at this point. So we ended up, whereas, yeah, which is great, right?
That's your
So literally at this point, whereas when they were going to school, they'd get like, 20-minute practice in, before school, and if we're lucky, we'll get another practice in after. Now, for example, my younger son woke up this morning and he loves the piano. He went to the piano, he played his pieces for 20 minutes, and he'll probably get another practice in another hour or so, and then another one by the time he sleeps. So what we've really found is that they've actually been able to use this time at home to actually practice a lot more. So that's been one of the things for us.
I think on my end, the big thing is the intrinsic motivation. It's not so easy for a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, but growing up, I think the biggest thing is through games, especially at this age. And so we've derived kind of new games, things such as playing 5 or 8 keys on the piano and having them guess like what notes are there, or name that composer, right? And these are things where, especially where they are in their piano development, they're playing tunes that they've heard on the radio or they've heard, by classical composers and classical songs, and they're motivated. They want to play like that. And so I think just by playing games, it really does make a big difference. And it's not kind of traditional crack the whip, sit on the piano, play what you have to play, and then get off. Now it's more, we really want them to get on themselves.
And Keiko, what are you noticing that's either the same, different? Your daughter is living and breathing music. She must be in music more than anything else. So it's
yeah. Well, because of the coronavirus, we are at home more. So you're right. Like the other parents, there's more practice time, which is great, and there's not as much commute time, which is awesome. Because she was so involved, we were at PCM so often. Which we love. That's why PCM became our second home. But on the other hand, it's a lot of commute time because we live here in Burbank, and to go back and forth from Pasadena was taking a lot of time. So now she can use that time to practice. So she's actually making, like the other parents are noticing, progress during this time. And so music is continuing her learning. Even with theory could still be done online with the teacher, going over the theory workbook, and then she took the theory exam with the Royal Conservatory. That happened all online, so she was able to continue her regular theory class and her examination process. The group class, the Intermediate Violin Ensemble, Amy Creston did a great job of finding ways to keep the kids busy and playing along in a different kind of a way, not playing. Well, they were playing together, but they were playing along with her so they could still play. And then we found other ways of creating a group experience where they did a virtual concert of recordings with Amy's click track. And then my husband, we recruited him, volunteered to put the video together. And it was a beautiful My Favorite Things. They played My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music, and they turned that into a virtual concert at the end of the semester. So that was wonderful. Amy also found ways to do things like outside of regular class, like bingo, theory bingo, music theory bingo, which was great. And it got all the kids together talking, and there was that social aspect that's really important for those group classes that she was able to maintain. And And then even Elizabeth Hedman, my violin teacher, she has studio classes. I know some other teachers are doing this too, where they have studio classes with their kids or summer recitals. And the kids again get together and share their music. And with the studio class, sometimes afterwards, they all get to just talk socially. And they enjoy that because Kehlani really loves the social aspect of music. So she's glad that that's able to continue. So it's wonderful that PCM and the teachers have figured out a way, and the staff, to continue the music learning through this all. She's still growing and soaring with her music.
Yeah, I'd love to just hear a little bit more from all of you. Thank you for reminding me that there were all these workarounds that you talked about last time that I'm sure several of the parents who are listening now are familiar, but it's really interesting to me that every discipline, every instrument, every configuration requires something special, different. And that in most cases, with the exception of the mariachi program, I think I heard, there was a workaround. And if some of you want to just, add on to what Kiko was speaking about, I found it fascinating, like how one of the issues was that Zoom, as you can all tell, has not great sound quality. So Nancy, I believe you were talking about that a little. If we could just, go into a little bit more of that too, because that's part of our life is to me the kind of implicit and explicit ingenuity of some of the way we're operating now and how your kids are handling it.
Yeah. I think for my clarinetist, he initially, I think there was a song or two that he actually just needed to record because, as you said, the audio is just, there's no way to get the same quality of sound. And so he sent that video to Chris so he could get a better feel of the tone. And for Jaden, he was part of a quartet this year. And as Kiko said, the ensemble groups, it just has difficulty. So those kids decided to get together on their own and they took turns playing their parts. And that was completely unsupervised. It was, again, as Kiku said, they just wanted to connect with each other musically. And so they took that on themselves to keep going with some of their songs. And then Felix Bullock had them each record their part for a specific song and put it together in a video. And it was actually beautiful. It was really well done. The guitar department had a end of year concert, and that was one of the songs. And then for my cellist, he actually was in a quartet this year with Rowena Hamill, a cello quartet. And so they continued lessons, and it sort of switched over into more theory, which I think was extremely helpful because he wasn't, I think all musicians could probably use a little more theory. So he ended up getting quite a bit of that. And she had them perform one of the songs that they were working on. So again, it was just a sense of continuing to share music with fellow musicians. So he got to connect with his quartet from the beginning of the quarantine through the end of the year. So it was actually wonderful.
And I think, Susie, you were talking too about the fact that your kids think anything sounds good if they're playing, and that because they're a little younger. And there was this issue of showing process. I'd love for you to talk about that. And that requires some tech ability on the part of the parents. But that was very interesting to me because very young kids. I mean, I have a 7-year-old grandchild, and my hat is off to you because it's different. It's very different. So.
It really is. And I think when it came down to it, just how Zoom has basically been integrated, a lot of the work fell on us. So just to give you an idea of what our typical lessons look like, we're on a bench. I've got one playing and I'm sitting next to the other one. Eric's got the phone just to make sure, that Dr. Cook can see the music that they're playing, and then they can also see the hand position.
In the process.
Bear in mind, he also
They're
doesn't
playing.
read. Bear in mind, he also doesn't read music, so that's
And
another
so there are
challenge.
times when Susie's hand will cut across and be like, and move over.
That would be me.
But you know, so what it came down to was the parent being very aware of what are some of the issues to help the child, right? So it's very relatively simple examples. Like for my boys, they love playing the piano with their fingers flat, and we can't do that. We got to play it with their fingers rounded. So if it's coming from me, it's, you know, it's in one ear out the other. But if it's coming from Dr. Cook, it's like, oh, I better shape up right away. So, you know, we would make it a point to, like, you know, either text Dr. Cook before and say, hey, these are some of the issues that we've had prior to our lessons. And during the lesson, we'll make it a point, you know, to show him, you know, this is what they're doing wrong. And so that's how we've actually made up for a lot of, you know, kind of what we're missing when it's in person. And quite frankly, I feel like we're actually able to focus on specific issues even better at this point. So that's actually been one of the workarounds that we've done. But again, I think this comes down to the fact that you have to have a really good relationship with the teachers. Always talk to them, right? They're there. They're a partner with you to help teach, you know, your kids how to play music and the instrument that your kid has basically selected. So, you know, having that really good relationship with them, feeling like you can just email them or just text them or something, that has really been a blessing. So.
And so Eric has learned how to read music too, right? Mm-hmm.
I can read treble, but when it comes to bass, I have to convert and I have to step everything up too. And we do FaceTime, so we don't Zoom, we FaceTime. And the other thing, I think the prior panel with the teachers, one suggestion was that some students would provide the teacher with the music beforehand. So they would, you know, take a picture of it and send it, so the teacher would have it in front of them. And so we had asked Dr. Cook, and he said that it's fine if we just scroll through. And in fact, that was his preference there. So we've heard of, you know, other methods of providing information, such as recording the clarinet and sending over that, you know, if we want Dr. Cook to hear the tone, I think that's a great idea, right? Send him a recording of their piano play beforehand. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, just, I mean, it's going to be an interesting, you know, I was a big believer in portfolio process when I was running the Armory, where children actually would keep track of their visual portfolio material because we're a visual arts organization. And so it may be interesting for them to actually listen to their recordings as they progress too. Because one of the things I've learned about one of PCM's qualities of many is this idea of this sort of metacognition, of understanding what you're understanding. Which leads me to another question. And many of you have already answered it a little bit, but I'd like you to go just a little bit deeper. And there's, what have you learned about learning? And I'd actually like to start with Kiku, even though you know, your daughter is fairly independent, and then we're going to go to the shorties because they aren't independent, and then we're going to wind up with Nancy. But what did you feel that you as a parent learned about learning?
Well, you know, I forgot to mention this earlier, that Kelly is like 14 years old, so she's kind of like the middle in between, you know, like Eric and Susie's and Nancy's children. She's kind of like, she wants to be, well, actually, and she grew up with the Suzuki method, where the mom, you know, had to do a lot of helping the student learn. And then now we're at this transition place where she's like a teenager. So I'm trying to, you know, let her leave the nest a little bit. And she's a little hesitant. She'll be like, Mom, come here, you know, say hi to the teacher. Can you just stay here and write notes? And then I write the notes, and then she doesn't read the notes. So it's like, why are you having me sit here? Are you writing the notes anymore? You're ready to move on. So she's in that transition area. But what I'm learning about the whole learning process here is how much the teachers have to like communicate. They have to, I think, work really hard, because they're using their verbal skills so much to explain things that they were able to show more easily, or they can't touch, or, you know, like if they need to correct something with their hands, they have to really use all their verbal skills to explain things. And so I have a deeper appreciation definitely for the teachers. I mean, I already did, because they're so great, but I'm just amazed at how they're able to make this all work, and their dedication they're not like giving up and just saying this is too hard. They're making it work. So hats off to them.
A huge part of it. I find myself just astonished by, especially.
And you know, there's the whole thing about learning is that there's the performance factor, which was important part of their learning. They would have Friday recitals. A lot of our kids would sign up for those. It's great for kids. The teachers encourage them to go and learn some performance skills, not just playing or practicing. And so the Kehlani's teachers were great in saying, yeah, that's fine. We can do the recordings when she finishes a piece, and then she can post them. She can share them with family and friends. And so that keeps her performance level going and keeps us busy with all the recordings. But that's great that she can, that the teachers are also thinking of how to continue that part of her learning.
So impressive. So, and then Susie and Eric, what, you know, you're literally physically there the entire time. So you've gotten a really strong primer on pedagogy, haven't you? So what would you like to share in addition to what you've already said?
Well, I mean, I think I can't stress enough, like just how important it is for the parents to be there mentally and physically to really take to really guide our children through this time period, to be honest. And you know, at the end of the day, what we realize is that something really amazing can come out of this, right? Because what ends up happening, like I said before, is that the kids end up practicing a lot more. And then kind of to what Nancy was saying, they start taking ownership of the fact that it's their instrument, right? It's not something that mom and dad said, hey, you know, you guys have to play this. It's they selected the instrument and said, hey, if I'm going to get good at this instrument, it's because I'm going to be practicing and I'm going to actually really, you know, enjoy what I'm doing. So that's you know, that's I think one of the key takeaways. And in terms of what we've learned, well, Eric's learned to read notes, music a lot better. And you know, I mean, we just learned to really be patient with our kids when they're going through all this. And the other thing is quite frankly, is the community at PCM. I don't think we would actually, our boys would be doing well during this time period if it wasn't for the community, to be very honest. Just the support that we're getting from the teachers, it's amazing. And even from like all the staff who put together all the ability to kind of meet virtually, that's basically, you know, the backbone that makes this actually all work.
Now, when you say doing so well, are you mean doing so well in terms of their playing piano or doing so well in general? I mean, I think because is PCM actually your mental health edition?
You know, to be honest, for me, it actually is
more.
Me, PCM actually is for my mental health. I mean, because
mine too.
So because, like I mentioned, because I actually play in the or I'm taking lessons in part of the adult ukulele class. The class is about an hour and a half, and for me as a community, it's like the one thing that I realized I missed so much because of COVID is the ability to reach out, be in a room with people, playing a beautiful instrument, and you know, just really enjoying that company and you know, every single week for an hour and a half, I get to mentally de-stress, right?
That's,
and that's
my stress level.
Your stress level goes up.
They're inversely correlated.
Yeah.
But you know, at the end of the day, you know, it's doing, when I say doing so well, I think I specifically mean musically, because it's the community that's really been supporting them. And quite frankly, I think with a lot of the stress with little kids, especially on, you know, in front of the screen, parents becoming much more aware that screen time can potentially affect them. You know, I like that they have something that they're perfecting off the screen, and that is basically their instrument. So.
And Nancy, you started with a very deep kind of statement about kind of taking internal, you know, I say using external pressure and turning it into internal desire, or starting with external and moving to internal. Is there anything else though that you're noticing? You know, and again, you've been homeschooling, so you are walking the walk. but I am curious if this has shifted anything else in your mind.
Well, I think it's supported it. Learning is dynamic. Sometimes it's fast and sometimes it's slow. And we have to respect that process that our kids are going through developmentally, just personality wise, all of that. We learn through another part of our homeschooling philosophy is that we learn through science of relations. I can understand this because it's like that. And so we make all of these interconnected just points of learning that foster our learning. And that for me is a process of practicing where they can take what their teacher is communicating and then go mess around with it. That's the self-education part of it. If it was only a transfer of knowledge, I would be a multi-instrumentalist by now with all of the hours that I've logged in guitar and cello and clarinet. It's not enough. You have to appropriate it. And so I think that's what I've spent the last 8, 9, 10 years watching, is that it really is, all learning is dynamic and it's really self-generated. And we're, like for Susie and Eric, and I'm sure for Kiko, all parents who are doing this, we have to lay a foundation. I spent many, many hours sitting beside all of my kids developing these habits, habit of attention, their focus, and you just incrementally drag that out. Now they're practicing 2 hours or more a day because it's actually just what they need in order to stay on top of their material. And when you do that, it's self-generating because their practice time is so productive now that they actually want to practice more because they are moving through their material faster.
Right.
They can hear themselves improving. And so the reward is all in the effort. It's all tied together. And so there are many days where they don't want to practice, but the reality is, in general, overall, they will discipline themselves to do it because it has become life-giving for them. So I think I've just watched this unfold over the last 12 years of homeschool, of just watching my kids appropriate the resources for their own education. So
it's interesting, the kind of generative discussion that's going on is, one is the importance of the group and community as a form of sustaining. And the other is the form of mastery that is really important now too. And in some ways, I'm gonna leap off the cliff and you can stop me, but I think it is important for kids to have some level of control over something right now. I'm just, listening to you all, I'm realizing this is something that this experience is giving them. I do remember, and what made me think of it is my daughter's a musician now, and did as Melissa said, go to PCM for many years and Idlewild and so on. And I remember her coming home from school often when she had a bad day, and she'd slam the door and I'd hear her practice. And that was her way of just centering herself. And I'm thinking, listening to this is a centering proposition. I have another couple of questions that are a little bit easier. And last time I asked it, there was thundering silence. So let's see what happens this time. Which I think you know which one I'm going to ask. Given what you've experienced, is there anything from this period that you'd like to see continued once you're back in your actual community of PCM? And we have...
Started off.
Right, we did bring up the fact, right? Didn't we, that it's like if a child is away from their house or on vacation or something, they can still do a lesson with Zoom.
One. Okay, that one. Okay.
I do think it's that. I mean, I think the one thing that I really appreciated, and I can't remember, someone mentioned this earlier, the attitudes of our teachers has been incredible. They didn't miss a beat. There was no focus on any negativity. Just
Right.
we're picking up from where we left off, and we are going to make this work. We're going to figure out how to thrive musically in
Mhm.
this season. And so I think that that sense of the reality is creativity comes from constraint. And so we have constraint right now. And so where that happens, creativity will abound. And so I just feel like the teachers at PCM are tapping into that creativity to make the situation work. And I just feel like hopefully that will open doors and other possibilities once we no longer have to quarantine. You know, we will see what's been percolating in their minds and what comes as a result of this.
Yeah. Anybody else on the joy of self sequestration before I ask you my last question? And then I'm going to kind of go over some things I heard to cue up all the larger community. Other happy thoughts about COVID-19?
No.
I know.
No happy thoughts.
Get rid of it. So any other, so the last thing I asked this, and it was an interesting, just kind of led to a number of sort of stray thoughts, was just anything that comes to mind that you didn't say that's important. And Nancy, I think you're talking about the teachers' attitudes is really key, but anything else that you feel is important to speak about before we open this up? And I'm going to do a little kind of, this is what I heard to remind everybody of what we said too.
You know, I remember Nancy had mentioned in our last conversation about how she was able to get her children to practice in different rooms. I wasn't quite sure about how you were able to navigate that because I only have one child. You know, she basically practices in the living room where we work here in the office. But how do you deal with, you know, I know there are PCM families that have multiple children that are practicing and trying to do that and having lessons and practicing.
Um, we have to get creative. There are times in my home where it sounds like an orchestra warming up because there are multiple instruments going at the same time, but they practice in their rooms with their doors closed, and they've made it work. My Jude, my clarinetist, will practice outside, which our neighbors absolutely love. We'd have people pop their heads over the fence to watch him. So we've just tried to make it work how we can, and we've been able to stagger the lessons so that during the Zoom calls there really is only one playing at a time. That actually worked out pretty seamlessly. So, but yeah, if you have multiple musicians with different instruments, you're just gonna have to figure out how to do it in your home.
Well, just a practical question on that. So was there a level of flexibility in scheduling the private lessons then with all this jumble of kind of schedules of other students going on, Nancy, or Kiku? You're the ones who seem to be just really busy. Yeah.
Part of it was the way that we had lessons set up. We, like Kiku, were at PCM almost daily at times. So I tried to overlap lessons as much as possible. And so that just sort of worked out with some of we kept similar Zoom time calls. My cellist got pushed a little bit earlier, so that made it easier. And then my guitarist was on a different day. And then with the ensembles going away, that actually opened up a lot more time. So that just sort of worked seamlessly for us. But I mean, I think for families that do have to coordinate that is something to take into consideration if you can just stagger them a little bit. Yeah.
Just some clarity. I thought that you did maintain some level of ensemble work, all of you. Am I wrong, or did I miss that?
Yes, actually, and that was on a different night with Rowena Hamill. Monday nights, Ash had his, and so we had dinner while he was up in his room performing for Rowena and his quartet. And then Jaden, just whenever he had time, because he was coordinating himself with the other three members of his ensemble, they just worked out those times when it was convenient. So, yeah.
Any other issues that were not covered today that anybody wants to bring up before we turn to my summation and other questions? Yeah.
You know, one thing I will add.
Right there. Okay. Yes, Nancy, and then I think it's Eric. Yeah.
My older two, their ears are pretty developed, but I think for my 14-year-old, and I'm sure this is just a process for every musician in attuning their musically. I think part of the blessing of the Zoom lesson was it really forced him to work on that on his own. He didn't have Andrew Cook and Rowena to be adjusting that his tone for him all the time. And so that was one of the areas where he really had to take ownership for just taking time to really focus on what his ear was telling him. So even with the limitations of sound, I think there's room for development in that because they can be listening to music, professional musicians all the time, which is tuning their ear. So that was nice.
Andrew, you wanted to say something too, I think.
I did want to point out one blessing in disguise that I've noticed with the COVID period. Like I said, it's afforded us the ability to stay home with the kids for a longer period of time. And on the flip side, I've spoken to many parents, and this is just an extremely stressful period because we have the kids 24/7. But it also means that we can assess where they are in their developmental milestones. And so Terrence is a good example. He's 6, right? He's very young. It's more linear, right? He needs us to guide him, and we work with him directly. Isaac being near 9, it's become a little trickier. And I think one of the things that I've had to learn, and I think it's important, is to allow him to fail, right? And if we're constantly hand-holding him, if we're constantly telling him, you need to practice today, you need to do this, you have to do your homework, it doesn't work, because then the only time he picks up the pencil or the only time he practices piano is when we tell him. And it doesn't work that way. So we've had periods where he didn't practice for a couple days, or leading into practicing for Dr. Cook, and he was not very good. And so we show him the ramifications of not practicing. And this doesn't hold just with piano practice. It really holds true with almost everything in life, that if you don't make your bed, if you don't wash your clothes, if you don't do your homework, things fall apart, right? So I look at this as kind of a test for him. Again, Terrence, I think, is a little bit on the younger side, but at 8 to 9, there are certain things and certain responsibilities that he needs to be accountable for now. And so we're seeing that, and I am more than willing to let him fail. With enough guidance that he can accomplish what he needs to accomplish.
Well, did Isaac know he was not prepared when he was not prepared when he was in his lesson?
It's a great question, and that is something where we actually gave Dr. Cook the heads up, right? And so it's that open communication. We told them, hey, be prepared. It's going to be a tough week. It's going to be rough.
Not going to sound good.
Yeah, and so that tandem of Dr. Cook telling him, well, so here is the result, and the result is you perform poorly. He would never say that. But what we do like to do is we actually like to assign them a grade, right? We want Dr. Cook to tell them that, oh, well, you got a 95 today, or you got, a 70, or whatever it is. But we want them to see, their work ethic and what it generates, and the results and the fruits of their labor. And we've seen that because the two of them, although they're 2.5 years apart, but in terms of their playing capabilities, they've closed the gap quite a bit. Terrence has closed the gap, and so now he's kind of chasing Isaac, and so he wants to play the same music that Isaac is playing.
Oh, that's very interesting too. as all of you have been. So this is what I've heard for those of you out in the ether. I don't see you, but and for you all too. Let's make sure I got it all. That that there was a real focus for all of you in transitioning to self-regulation, be it practicing or, you know, their own agency, doing their own, you know, meeting and greeting, and continuing to play music together outside of a formal teaching environment. What I said earlier, move from external pressure to internal desire. They're on their way. Importance of recitals and group ensemble work, you know, as these, not just for, you know, we've made progress, but well, more that we've made progress, but also to kind of create a sense of time and momentum and stopping points, you know, and preparation. The lack of distraction, more time at home that led to more practice, in some cases twice as much practicing. All of these workarounds that were just extraordinary. I'm just sort of wrapping my head around it. The ensemble work with the guitar group, the chamber music group, treating it almost like a master program. The dealing with the tone issues of Zoom and sending in videos of videotaping or showing your phone so that, you know, over your son's hand so that your teacher could see that. The sort of the technical proficiencies that are required of some parents, and to the point where Kiku's husband even was documenting and editing films. And then you didn't mention this, but earlier I believe some of you said that there was some teacher meetups with socially distant, correct, you know, separate situations. And then, you know, just even making a lot of this fun, like music theory bingo. So to me, those are all the workarounds. I would say too, this kind of, I would see you all as heroic. There is a troika of heroes in this situation, the motivated students who are maintaining motivation, the ongoing problem solving and availability of the faculty and PCM, and most importantly to me, the parent involvement as translators and coaches, and just really giving a sense to their kids that this matters, and knowing that eventually it matters to them. The positive response of these faculty members, this isn't all deficit, we can make this work. You know, that some classes work better in these situations and some just don't, like mariachi. I would say too, that I heard as well, not as explicitly, is the importance of the existing culture of the community of the Pasadena Conservatory of Music. That is valued by its community, that they wanted to maintain an idea of community. And I would say too, this is my own observation, not necessarily said openly, but that the conservatory's own focus on strong pedagogical awareness and practice has set the groundwork for so much of the ways in which the faculty and parents have really moved up into this challenge and have made something really important happen. So I think, was that kind of, did I get it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are we exhausted? Yes, we are, but we're motivated. Melissa, are there any questions that the parents or anyone else who is listening today that was anybody asking anything?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So if anyone is inspired to enter any more questions, please do so in the Q&A, which can be accessed at the bottom of your screen. So the first one is kind of a practical question, and I'm going to, I think, start with Susie, because you had mentioned screen time. And this one is, how have your kids adjusted to the increased use of screens? And are there ways to break up the day? What do you do? What do you find has worked?
I'm going to preface this by saying that prior to the whole shutdown, or lockdown, I should say, our kids have spent zero time on the screen. That first week that they started doing online learning at school, they spent more time on the screen than they did their entire life. So having said that, it was quite the transition for us. We have noticed some pitfalls, particularly in our older son. What we've noticed is that with increased screen time, because on the screen you push a button and something happens right away, you get that instant gratification. what ends up happening is that that translates to less patience in other areas of study, shall we say. So whereas, for example, he used to be able to sit and just read for like long periods of time. We're noticing that those are things that are actually now lacking. So then the question is, how are we getting around that? We're still trying to get around all of this. But I think that the key is basically what we've been trying to do is basically, give them reward systems, right? It's like, well, if you do XYZ, then you'll get ABC, right? And that has seemed to actually work out quite well, particularly with our younger son. A silly example is yesterday I wanted him to practice the piano, and usually during the first couple of days after the lesson, because he has brand new songs, it's harder for him to get to want to practice because they're more challenging. But later on in the week, when he knows the songs inside out, it's like he'll just hop on the piano and just play at will. So, I said, well, hey, why don't you practice? And I've got a bag of Funyuns. You want some Funyuns? Boom! He started practicing. So it's like knowing what really drives your kids, and then basically, trying to steer them away from a lot of the screen time. We've really used the screen when it's absolutely necessary to meet with their teacher and things like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely would second what Susie said, and I think the important thing is, especially in this environment with school starting up in August or September, and in all likelihood that there will be some form of online hybrid, I think it's important to make sure that kids continue to read, things that do take, and build their endurance. And I treat reading exactly like sports and exercise and whatnot. And make sure that they get their 20, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of reading every single night. Like, don't let a single day pass by without having them read, because it trains the brain and it builds endurance. And so, I think, and it was, the transformation was very quick. I think there was just a 1 week hiatus between when school ended to when we told Isaac, okay, get going, let's read this book. And he said that he was having difficulty focusing. Now, there were many other factors, more than just screen time. It could also be particular age, introducing sports, and just a lot of other factors that are at play. But I do think some degree of screen time probably had an impact. So I think the most important thing is just every night, the things that matter, make sure you continue doing it.
I think that makes perfect sense. I myself notice if I watch too much TV or, binge Netflix or whatever, I have a harder time focusing on reading. So I can only imagine how impressionable that is, for the young mind. So we have one more question, and then I think Elisa has a couple closing questions. And this one is, I guess, could be for everyone, and maybe we'll start with with Nancy, who has the oldest children. We can work down, go to Kiku, and then end with Eric and Susie. But how do you think your kids have been impacted by not seeing their friends and other students in person? And what have been some of the things that you've tried to encourage them to interact, even if it's through a screen?
They've definitely been impacted. My kids are more social than myself and my husband. But I think just in general, what we are trying to do with our kids is teach them how to thrive in every situation of life. And so this one has this particular complication of how do they actually connect with their friends. And so they have worked out game times. They are D&D fans and Magic the Gathering fans. And so they have organized board game time to play with their friends and elaborate camera setups so they can see their friends and their cards. And so they've made it work that way. We are older too, do have phones. Our youngest does not. And I mean, sort of to touch off the last question, the reality is we just live in an age where we have digital technology all around us that isn't going to go anywhere. And so we, at least my husband and I, feel it's our responsibility to actually teach our children to navigate all of that in the healthiest way possible, because the reality is at a certain point, they will need a phone, whether it's when they're in your home or out. And so we are just trying to teach them just how to live a healthy life, to be whole people, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, on all of those ends. So reading, they've got to go running a couple of days a week, and sometimes they'll run past their friends' homes and wave and chat from long distances. So they've definitely tried to be proactive about getting that time with their friends. It is not as much as they would like, but they're making do.
I would say ditto, ditto, because Kehlani's 14, she does have a phone, and she texts her friends. She does miss being with them. But, kids are really adaptive, I guess, flexible and creative, and they will find ways of, they'll ask to if they can still connect somehow in some fashion with their friends. So the way that we can do that is virtually. It's with FaceTime and texting, sharing videos, calling. So they're trying all those virtual ways to keep those bonds going. And with their music friends, similar to what Nancy was mentioning, Kehlani has some music buddies, and then they're saying, okay, well, why don't we learn this song together? So they find ways. It's great. It's great. It's a relief to know that Kehlani doesn't complain. She doesn't say I'm bored. I'm sad and it can't be. She's not whining around the house. She still feels like she's connecting, so that's great.
I think for us, because our kids are younger, I think in the beginning it was a lot more challenging because especially for our 6-year-old, they're at that age where they really want to play with other friends, right? They need to be on that playground. And then that has been taken away. So, you get creative at that point. And one thing that I noticed that was very interesting is that when that, ability to play with friends was kind of taken away, he got creative in different ways, right? Whether that was, they go out, both boys going outside, chalking up our backyard, creating obstacle courses, or for us, we do a lot of running and we've actually incorporated the boys into our running. So we've actually ran over to their friend's house and they would run with a piece of chalk. They chalk up their sidewalk, leaving message for their friends saying, hi, so-and-so, I was here, and being able to kind of at least see the friends, even if it's from the window, but just to still kind of have that human connection with their friends. It becomes something that we started becoming very creative about to try to solve that problem. And I think, to be very honest, I think it's actually been working very well. We're very sensitive about noticing whether or not there are, I guess, certain social issues that are coming up. And what we do find is they'll ask us, hey, can I FaceTime so-and-so, and we're perfectly fine at that point to just say, okay, well, earn it, right? If you want to FaceTime your friend, earn it. And that's actually has worked out quite well as kind of like a whole system.
I think another benefit of the pandemic period is that, they realize that they become best friends. And they're also their worst enemies. But,
Yes.
they hang out together and we hear them chit-chatting late at night. We sleep really early and we don't mind if they stay up, goofing around as long as they're having fun. But look, they're brothers for life. And so we want them to really enjoy their time. If it means they're going to get hurt, as long as we don't have to go to the hospital, we're okay with that.
I love that. I've definitely seen in my neighborhood a lot of chalk messages of kids leaving messages for their friends or just hopeful messages for passersby. It's really, really sweet. Elisa, I'll turn things back over to you.
And we will end about a minute or two over, but I think these are good questions for us to end with. The first one I have for Stephen, and I'll give you both, Stephen, is it typical for faculty to be available this much? Was this level of availability true pre-COVID, or is this setting a new bar for the PCM to meet, number one? And then what's the impact been on the conservatory's participation since this occurred?
Sure. On the first front, music making is a pretty personal and intense enterprise to start with. And the major mode that we're working in is one-on-one lessons. When they're ensembles, it's still very intimate. And I have noticed our teachers before COVID are extremely attached and devoted to their students. It is personal because the nature of the lessons is personal. You know, it's just concentrated time one-on-one or with a very small group of people. And I suspect that the fear of what COVID brought, the distancing, just made the teachers even more committed to preserving that. And when we have some faculty meetings via Zoom, and when you hear them talking about their students, the passion and the caring is so obvious. So maybe it was always there, but maybe now we see it even more clearly, and maybe it's slightly intensified even because of the constraints. So that's what I would say about that. Yeah, and we've also chosen very well who's on our faculty. These are tremendous people, and we are all the beneficiaries of the extra miles they are all going to during this time. Our participation is very high. We have about 90% retention with private lessons at the conservatory. It astonished me, but it did happen overnight, literally. I mean, we were up one day and we were down the next, and I'm still not quite sure how it all happened, except for a lot of the teachers already had here and there tried Skype lessons while they were traveling. And so there was some familiarity, but it happened very fast, the transition to being online, certainly for the private lessons. And I think there's a similar dynamic here, that the constraints have made this enterprise even more valued. And so people, this isn't the thing they're giving up. People are really sticking with their music lessons, and it is part of the community that's already been built. There's a strong sense of community, but I sense from teachers, from families, that this is not the thing they want to give up. And this even extends to our adult students who are taking the music history classes. And like Susie's ukulele class, this is a social thing and something that's clearly really important to them.
Well, this is a beautiful way to end a discussion about pedagogy, parenting, teaching, and community. And I thank you all for being here. I, for one, have gotten my husband to take a music history class with me, and we're on our second one. And he said, I just really need some intellectual stimulation that's meaningful to me. And so I want to thank PCM from the bottom of all our hearts, right, everyone?
Yes.
Again,
Thank you.
and
Thank
you,
Thank
parents.
you.
Thank you, parents. Wonderful parents. So.
Thank you, Elisa, for guiding the conversation today expertly, and to Nancy, Kiku, Eric, and Susie for sharing your insights. It's been really helpful to hear about your experience and the creative solutions or workarounds that you've put into place. And I just also want to thank everyone for tuning in today. We're really glad to be exploring new programs for you to enjoy online, and look forward to continue connecting with you in the months to come. Everyone, please take care, and we look forward to seeing you online again soon. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.